Hi, I'm Bruce Eckel,
I'm James Ward.
and this is another screencast in First Steps in Flex. Now we're going to look at desktop applications. So does this mean that all of the learning that I do to learn Flex is not limited to creating web applications?
That's right. Yep. So with Flex, we can create applications which run in the browser, or we can create applications which run on the desktop. And to run them on the desktop, we use Adobe Air. So like Flash Player is in the browser, Adobe Air is the way to run Flex applications on the desktop.
So Adobe Air is a separate download and installation than
It
Flash
is.
is?
Yep, it is.
Okay. And what is the difference between the Flash runtime and the Air runtime?
So the core of both of those runtimes is the same. It's just that the Air runtime extends the Flash Player runtime and adds additional capabilities, things that you can't do inside of the browser sandbox. So if you want to do native drag and drop, if you want to do copy and paste integration with the clipboard, if you want to be able to save data locally, to build offline applications. There's all sorts of use cases that just aren't very easy to do inside of the browser sandbox, and that's why Adobe Air allows you to get outside of that browser sandbox and do a lot more things that you can't do inside the browser.
So you can do kind of operating system level things?
Yes, some APIs have been exposed. Not all APIs. So there's certain things that just can't be done in Air today. Like let's say you want to talk to a USB GPS device. That's just not an API that is available yet in Air. And at some point in the future, Adobe will probably add that API to the Air runtime. But today it's not in there, and there's no way to actually do that because Air, like Flash Player in the browser, intends for applications to be cross-platform, and we don't want to allow developers to really make it really easy for them to break the cross-platform compatibility because that's really one of the core values of Air applications.
Okay. So, um, so there are things I can do, like I can read and write files. Isn't there something to create local databases?
Yep, there's a local database. It's a SQLite SQL database, and so there's some ActionScript APIs that you use to read and write data from the database. There's APIs to read and write files from the file system, APIs to handle drag and drops from the operating system. So all sorts of APIs that just don't exist inside of the browser.
Okay. Well, let's see an example. I'd like to see how this works.
Sure. So we're going to go into Flex Builder, and we're going to create a Flex application. So let's call this one desktop app. And here's the important part when we create this application is to specify that we're going to create a desktop application as opposed to a web application. And then we can just hit finish. So now in this application, what we're going to do just is to show off one of the APIs available in Air. We're going to build a simple application that just allows the user to save some information that they type into this application to a local file.
Now, I'm noticing that instead of application, it says windowed application. Is that the only difference?
That's one of the primary differences here is that our windowed application is different from the web-based application because when we're a desktop application, we do have to decide what type of windowing Chrome we're going to have in this application. The windowed application will use the system Chrome. We can specify to use our own Chrome. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can make the Chrome work. But the windowed application is what allows you to have that configurability on the Chrome.
Okay.
Yep, so that's the first primary difference. We're still going to be using the same components that we use when we're inside of the web browser, but we will have additional APIs available to us that are only available when we're in Air. So let's start building our application. First thing we're going to do is set a default window size for our application. So we'll set width to 400 and height to 400.
And if you didn't do that, it would be
default to something. I'm not sure what the default value is. And then let's add a rich text editor. So rich text editor is just a Flex component that allows us to do rich text editing. We'll give it an ID, we'll call it RTE, and set the width to 100%, and set the height to 100%. So that's our rich text editor.
And you could just run that the way it is, right?
We can, yeah. If we want to just run this application, what we're going to see when we run this application now is that it's going to pop up in a window on our system. It's not going to use the browser like we're familiar with. And there's a lot of things that are configurable about our applications. We can configure the icons that show. We can configure whether or not the status bar shows. So we can even do transparent applications. There's all sorts of interesting things that we can configure beyond what we're seeing here. This is just all the defaults.
But there's no way to save this.
Yeah, right now, so we can type information in, but there's no save button.
Okay.
So that's what we're going to go add. So let's go add the save button. Let's add a button. And we're going to give this button a label of save. And now let's add a click event handler on the button. So now in our click event handler, what we want to do is create a file object. So we're going to go f of type file. And this is an API that is only available when we're on the desktop. We don't have this file API when we're running inside the browser. So now we're going to say file.desktop directory. So we're going to default to the desktop directory.
Are there other directories that we can
Yeah,
go
there's
to?
some other ones that we can default to. Let's see some of those. Application directory, application storage directory, documents directory, so user directory, number of different directories.
So if you're in one of those directories, can you move around from it, or are you limited to those 4 directories?
No, you're not limited. These are just some convenient
Okay.
convenience that work cross-platform. So obviously your desktop directory, it differs between Windows, Mac, and Linux, but no matter what operating system you run this application on, this
They always
parameter
have
will
one.
take you to the user's desktop directory.
Okay.
Yeah. So now let's do f.browse for save. So what we want to do is we want to save this data out. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow the user to specify the file that they want to save this what they've entered into the rich text editor. So, and then this takes a parameter of the title of the window. We're just going to say save as. And then we're going to add an event handler. So what we want to do is when the user selects which file they are going to save, we want to actually do the save.
So browse for save is going to bring up a dialog box, and then they're going to browse around, and eventually when they select it,
Yep.
that'll generate an event, and you're capturing this event.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
And you're using the information from what they do to save the file.
Exactly.
I see.
So in order to write that event listener, we need to actually create our event. So let's add a script block. So in our script block now is where we're actually going to create a function that we're going to call when the user selects that file. So let's go create that function, private function. Let's call it save data. And it takes a parameter, an event of type event dispatcher, and returns void. And now when we actually run this function, what we're going to do is actually do the save. So to do that, we're going to create a stream of type file stream. Then we're going to new file stream. Then we need to set some parameters on our stream, or we need to open the file stream. So we're going to do stream.open. So an open takes a few parameters, the file and the file mode. So first, the file that we're going to save to is going to be in this event.target.
Because that's coming from the browse for save.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And we're going to cast this to a file.
So presumably when the user closes the browse for save box, that generates an event with the file name in the event.
Exactly.
Oh, as the target.
Yep.
Okay, there we go. And
Exactly.
so you just cast it to a file.
Yep.
So when we say file, we're really kind
It's really kind of a
file
handle.
name or
It's a
file
handle. Yeah.
Yeah, Java does the same thing where
Yeah.
you'd think it would be the file itself, but
Right.
it's actually like the file name or
Exactly.
the file path.
Yep. So-
Unfortunate, but
Yeah. I think we got that from Perl.
Really? Oh, maybe that's where they got it too.
So then we do file mode.write because we want to write to this file. And then stream. So now we're actually going to write out to the stream. And we're going to write the information in UTF bytes. And we're going to give it rte.html text. So we're going to take the HTML markup from the rich text editor that the user has typed in and actually write that out to the file. And then stream.close. So that's all the code that we need to do the save.
So now you need to take save data and stick it in your
That's right.
event listener.
So now we're going to put a reference to save data in our event listener. And I think that's about it.
Yeah.
Let's give it a try. Whoops. Did something wrong. Event target. This is... I mistyped this. This should not be event dispatcher, but just event.
Ah.
There we go.
Oh, it went away.
And it went away. Yep. So save data takes an event, not an event dispatcher. My mistake. Okay, so let's run this thing down and see how it works. So here's our rich text editor. We'll see we have our save button. Yeah.
Okay.
So now let's type in some stuff here. Let's do some formatting. We'll make this thing bigger. So we've just created some text. It's going to be in the HTML markup. So now let's hit the save button. So when we hit that save, it pops up our save dialog box.
For whatever operating system you're on.
Exactly. Yeah, it's using the native dialog. So let's call this foo.html. And we hit save. And as soon as we hit save, it then calls this save data function and writes the data out. So let's actually go verify that this thing was actually written out. Let's go into our desktop and pull up there it is, foo.html. Now we can just load that in the browser, and there we see the exactly what we had done in the rich text editor.
What's the source code look like?
Let's take a look here.
Source.
So this is using the HTML syntax inside of Flash Player. That's implemented in the rich text editor inside of Flash Player. So we see fonts and text formats and that sort of thing. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's our HTML.
Okay. So now, when you set up a regular Flash app for a web application, it just shows up on the web page.
Right.
And if the person hasn't installed Flash yet, the JavaScript is on that page automatically, and it says here's how to install it. Right. Okay, so that deploys pretty easily. Everybody's used to installing Flash on their system.
Yep.
Now, what happens with the deployment for this?
Yeah. So let me walk through how this works. So if the user doesn't have air, we want to be able to detect that and allow them to easily install it. So a good example of this is if we go to flex.org/tour, the Tour de Flex, and there's a desktop application built with Flex and Adobe Air that will show us how this works. So here's Tour de Flex, this installer badge. And this is the typical installer badge used by Air applications to detect whether or not the user has Air installed. So if I hit install now, what it's going to do, if I don't have Air installed or I don't have the right version of Air installed, it's going to go download and install Air for me, and then it's going to download and install Tour de Flex. So that all happens seamlessly. So this is called the installer badge. If you actually install Tour de Flex, there's a great example in Tour de Flex for how to set up this badge for your application. So what Air applications are is they're packaged into these .air files. So really what this installer is doing is just downloading and opening this .air file. So really what you need to do when you distribute an Air application is create the .air file. So let's actually walk through how we actually create the Air file. So right now we're kind of running in this debug mode using the ADL Adobe the Air debugger. And so let's actually create the Air file now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this project, and I'm going to tell it I want it to be a release build. And when I tell it that I want it to be a release build, I specify some information, tell it the Air file that I want it to export to. And now every Air file must be signed. So you can either create a self-signed certificate, or you can use, preferably, an authoritatively signed certificate to sign the AIR application. So we don't have one, so we're just going to create a self-signed certificate. I'm just going to make up some information here, and now it remembers that information. You can choose to timestamp the creation of this. If you do timestamp it, it does require an internet connection. So make sure when you have that check that that you are connected to the internet. And then it's going to begin creating that AIR file. It's going to ask us which files we want to include. Those are all required. So if we had other assets like images and stuff that we also want in there, we could select those, and then we just hit finish. So now what it's just created is this desktop app.air file. So this is our actual application all packaged up. So now this is what we'll use to distribute to our end users who want to install this application. This is also what we'll use when we create the installer badge that allows people to install this AIR application from the web. So if if someone already has AIR installed, then they can just double click on that AIR file, and that will launch the AIR installer. When we launch the AIR installer, what it's going to do is it's going to tell us some information about this AIR file. Publisher identity is unknown. That's because I used a self-signed certificate, and system access is unrestricted. So every AIR application has unrestricted system access. It can read and write files from wherever the operating system allows it to do that. So it's just warning the user, about these things. So let's hit install. We're okay with all that. We can specify if we wanted to add a shortcut to the desktop. That's all fine. Continue. And now it's installing the AIR application and running it. So there we get that application now actually running natively on our system. If we close it and want to relaunch it, it's now going to be in our start menu. We can go to our start programs. There we see it there, desktop app. We can launch it from there. We can launch it for offline. And this is now a natively installed application on our system.
So it doesn't have to reload the second time.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if you make a new version?
So there's another great example in Tourday Flex is how to do automatic updates and push updates out for AIR applications. So there's a whole framework called the AIR Update Framework for doing exactly that. There's some great samples inside of Tourday Flex for that.
Okay. And in the further learning, you can learn about native drag and drop, network detection, system notification. Oh, yes, here's application updating, how to use the SQL database, how to render HTML, and a few other things, including the sandbox.